The sound of hoofbeats pounded against the hard, packed earth as Willa Simmons raced across the Wyoming plains, her heart hammering in time with her mare's gallop. The year was 1878, and with each passing mile, she was leaving behind the suffocating confines of Boston society for the wild, untamed promise of the West. The telegram clutched in her saddlebag had arrived 3 weeks ago. Her uncle's ranch outside Glenrio needed her help, and she needed a fresh start. What she didn't know was that the broken man she would soon encounter would change everything she thought she wanted from this new life. Willa pulled back on the reins as she crested the hill overlooking the valley, where Glenrio nestled between rolling grasslands and distant mountains. The small settlement appeared modest from this distance, a main street with wooden buildings, a church steeple reaching skyward, and scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding landscape. Among them, her uncle's Crooked S ranch stood proudly against the backdrop of the Medicine Bow Mountains. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as she guided her horse down the slope. Her riding skirt was dusty from the journey, and her dark hair, once neatly pinned, now escaped in tendrils around her face. At 24, Willa had abandoned a comfortable but stifling life in Boston. After her parents' death 2 years prior, and a broken engagement to a banker who cared more for appearances than genuine connection, her uncle's invitation had been the perfect escape. The town of Glenrio appeared quiet as she rode in. A few people moved along the boardwalks, stopping to watch the newcomer. Willa straightened her back, fighting exhaustion from the final leg of her journey from the train station in Laramie. "Miss Simmons," a gruff voice called out as she reached the general store. Willa turned to see a weathered man in his 60s approaching. His white beard was neatly trimmed, and despite his age, he moved with the vigor of someone much younger. "Uncle James," she called back, relief flooding her voice. James Simmons reached up to help her dismount. "In the flesh." "Was beginning to worry you'd changed your mind. The train was delayed in Chicago," she explained, embracing her uncle briefly. It had been nearly 10 years since she'd seen him at her mother's funeral. "Well, you're here now," he said, stepping back to look at her. "You've grown into the spitting image of your mother." Willa smiled, though the comparison brought a familiar ache. "I hope I've brought some of her strength with me as well." "You'll need it," her uncle replied, his expression growing serious. "The ranch isn't what it once was." As they walked toward the general store, Willa noticed the whispers and stares from the townspeople. A woman in men's trousers and a proper riding jacket was clearly a novelty in Glenrio. "Your telegram mentioned difficulties," Willa said, keeping her voice low. "What's happened?" Her uncle sighed heavily. "Drought last summer, then early frost killed off half our calves. Lost some good men who moved on seeking better wages I couldn't provide. Then there's the matter of the Lazy G spread pushing at our boundaries." "The Lazy G?" "Garrett Lawson's ranch," her uncle explained, his voice hardening. "Been trying to buy me out for 2 years now. Got himself backing from some Eastern investors, thinks he can just take whatever land catches his fancy." Willa frowned. "But surely there are laws out here depend on who's enforcing them," James interrupted. "And our sheriff happens to owe Lawson a considerable gambling debt." Inside the general store, a plump woman with kind eyes approached them. "James Simmons, is this your niece you've been talking about for weeks?" "Martha, meet my niece Willa." "Willa, this is Martha Green, finest shopkeeper in the territory and the only person who'll still extend me credit." Martha laughed, the sound warm and welcoming. "Nonsense, James. Your word has always been good enough." She turned to Willa. "Welcome to Glenrio, dear. We don't get many Eastern ladies settling here." "I'm hoping to prove I'm more than an Eastern lady," Willa replied with a smile. "Well, you've certainly got your uncle's spirit," Martha said approvingly. "Now, what can I get for you two today?" While her uncle gathered supplies, Willa wandered the store, taking in the differences between this modest establishment and the department stores of Boston. Here, practical items dominated tools, seeds, preserved foods, and simple clothing. She was admiring a display of handcrafted leather goods when the store's door burst open. A young boy, no more than 12, stood panting in the doorway. "Mr. Simmons, you gotta come quick. It's Garrett, he's in a bad way." James set down the sack of flour he'd been examining. "What's happened, Tommy?" "Stampede up at Lightning Creek," the boy gasped. "His horse went down, got his leg caught under it. Me and Pa found him when we was checking our fence line." James turned to Willa. "I need to go. Garrett may be a thorn in my side, but no man deserves to be left injured." "I'll come with you," Willa said firmly, already moving toward the door. "I assisted Dr. Crawford in Boston for 2 years. Her uncle looked surprised but nodded. "Martha, we'll be back for these supplies later." The ride to Lightning Creek took nearly an hour, with young Tommy leading the way. As they approached a stand of cottonwoods by the creek, Willa saw a man kneeling beside a prone figure on the ground. "That's my pa," Tommy explained as they dismounted. "Garrett was conscious when we left to find help, but he wasn't doing so good." Willa followed her uncle to where the injured man lay. His hat had fallen aside, revealing thick brown hair streaked with dust. His face, though contorted with pain, showed strong features: a square jaw darkened with stubble, high cheekbones, and eyes squeezed shut against the pain. "Howard," James greeted Tommy's father. "How is he?" "Legs broken for sure," Howard replied grimly. "Been fading in and out. Horse rolled right over him before bolting, found him dragging himself toward the creek." Willa knelt beside the injured man, setting aside her initial hesitation. This was her uncle's rival, but right now he was simply someone who needed help. "Mr. Lawson," she said clearly. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling green that reminded Willa of the sea during a storm. Those eyes focused on her with confusion. "Who," he began, his voice raspy. "I'm Willa Simmons, James Simmons' niece. I have some medical knowledge. I need to examine your injuries." Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a grimace that might have been an attempt at a smile. "Simmons brought an angel to patch me up." "How?" "Ironic. Save your strength," Willa advised, already examining his leg. The break was clear, the lower leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. "This will need to be set before we move him," she told the men. For the next hour, Willa directed the men as they carefully splinted Garrett's leg using branches from the nearby cottonwoods. She worked methodically, drawing on her experience assisting Dr. Crawford. When they finally had him secured on Howard's wagon, Garrett had lost consciousness again, which was perhaps a mercy. "We should take him to the ranch," James said, surprising Willa. "Town's too far and Doc Simpson is away until tomorrow." Howard nodded in agreement. "Lazy G is a good 5 miles further. Your place makes sense, James, even with your history." As they traveled slowly back toward the Crooked S, Willa sat in the wagon beside Garrett, monitoring his condition. Despite his unconscious state, she noted the strength in his frame, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work despite his apparent success. This was not the soft-handed businessman she had expected her uncle's rival to be. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The Crooked S was smaller than Willa had imagined, a modest main house with a barn, bunkhouse, and corrals spread across a clearing backed by cottonwoods. 2 ranch hands came running as the wagon approached. "Miguel Peterson," James called out. "We need help getting him inside." With careful movements, the men carried Garrett into the house and to the spare bedroom. Once he was settled, Willa shooed everyone out except her uncle. "I need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey, and any medical supplies you have," she instructed. As James left to gather the items, she turned back to her patient. Garrett's face was pale beneath his tan, a sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. Willa gently wiped his face with her handkerchief, studying him. In repose, with the tension of pain momentarily eased, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a different man than the land-grabbing villain her uncle had described. When James returned with the supplies, Willa set to work cleaning the various cuts and abrasions Garrett had sustained in his fall. The most concerning injury remained his leg. "Uncle James, I need to set this bone before the swelling makes it impossible," she said. "I'll need your help and someone strong to hold him down. This will be painful even in his unconscious state." James called in Miguel, a stocky Mexican man with gentle hands despite his obvious strength. "He's the steadiest," James explained. Willa instructed them on how to position themselves, then took a deep breath. "On my count. 1, 2, 3, with a swift, sure movement, she pulled and manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. Even unconscious, Garrett's body jerked in response, a groan escaping his lips. Willa worked quickly to splint and wrap the leg properly. "Will he live?" James asked when they had finished. "If infection doesn't set in," Willa replied, washing Garrett's blood from her hands in the basin. "The next day or two will tell." Later that evening, after settling into her own room and changing into a simple dress, Willa returned to check on their patient. She found him awake, those sea-green eyes now alert and fixed on her as she entered. "So you're real," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than before. "Thought I might have dreamed you." "Very real, Mr. Lawson," Willa replied, approaching the bed. "How's your pain?" "Bearable," he answered, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "James Simmons' niece, you said, come to help him drive me off my land." Willa raised an eyebrow. "I came to help my uncle with his ranch, and currently I'm helping you recover from what could have been a fatal accident. Your land disputes seem rather secondary at the moment." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough, Miss Simmons." "You should rest," she said, checking his forehead for fever. His skin was warm but not alarmingly so. "Dr. Simpson will see you tomorrow when he returns to town." Garrett caught her wrist gently as she withdrew her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. Willa felt a strange flutter in her chest at the contact. "You're welcome, Mr. Lawson. Now rest." Over the next 3 days, Garrett remained at the Crooked S under Willa's care. Dr. Simpson had confirmed her treatment was appropriate and left additional supplies, pronouncing that moving Garrett was unwise for at least a week. During this time, Willa began learning the rhythms of ranch life. She rose early each morning, helped prepare breakfast with Maria, the Mexican cook who came in daily from her nearby home, then checked on Garrett before joining her uncle for the day's planning. James had been surprised by her insistence on learning every aspect of the ranch operations, but he soon recognized her quick mind and determination. By the 4th day, she was riding out with him to check on the cattle, her riding skills improving with each outing. It was on the afternoon of the 5th day that Willa returned to the house alone, her uncle having continued on to town for supplies. She found Garrett sitting up in bed, a book open on his lap, though his gaze was directed out the window. "You should be resting," she admonished, though there was no real heat in her voice. Garrett turned to look at her, those remarkable eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "I've been resting for 5 days. I'm beginning to forget what it feels like to stand." "Which is precisely why you shouldn't try," Willa countered, moving to adjust his pillows. "Dr. Simpson was very clear about keeping weight off that leg for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks in my competitor's house," Garrett sighed. "James must be enjoying this immensely." Willa paused, studying him. "Actually, he's been remarkably concerned about your recovery. Whatever is between you two, it doesn't seem to override basic humanity." Garrett had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Your uncle is a good man. Our disagreements are complicated." "Uncomplicate them for me," Willa suggested, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I've heard his side. I'm curious about yours." Garrett looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she was genuinely interested or setting a trap. Finally, he spoke. "I came to Wyoming 7 years ago with nothing but determination and the skills I'd learned working other men's ranches since I was 14. Started small, worked harder than anyone, took risks when they presented themselves." His voice held pride without arrogance. "The lazy G has grown because I've made smart choices, invested where others wouldn't, and yes, bought land when others needed to sell." "Including trying to buy my uncle's ranch," Willa prompted. Garrett nodded. "The Crooked S sits on the best water access in the county. With the droughts getting worse each year, that creek running through your uncle's property could be the difference between survival and ruin for many ranchers." "So it's purely business?" Willa asked, not entirely convinced. "It started that way," Garrett admitted, shifting slightly and wincing as the movement jarred his leg. "But your uncle took it personally, refused to even discuss selling or partnering, started spreading word I was trying to create a monopoly, turn smaller ranchers out. Weren't you?" His eyes met hers directly. "I wanted to create something sustainable, pooling resources, sharing water access, coordinating grazing. It makes sense in a place where nature can turn against you in a heartbeat." Willa considered this. "But you never explained it that way to my uncle." A shadow of regret crossed Garrett's face. "Pride on both sides, I suppose. After a while, it became easier to play the villain he thought I was." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Willa moved to the window and saw 3 riders entering the yard, rough-looking men she didn't recognize. "Who is it?" Garrett asked, noting her frown. "I don't know," she replied. 3 men. They don't look like they're here for a friendly visit." Garrett struggled to sit up straighter. "Describe them." As Willa did so, his expression darkened. "Tucker Briggs and his brothers. They work for me, but I've been having trouble with them lately. Caught them rustling cattle and fired them last month. They must have heard I was laid up here." A heavy pounding came at the front door. With the ranch hands out with the herd and Maria having left for the day, Willa was alone with an injured man and 3 potentially dangerous visitors. "My uncle's rifle is in his study," she said quietly. "Do you know how to use it?" Garrett asked. "Yes," Willa replied simply. Her father had insisted she learn despite her mother's protests. "Don't open the door," Garrett advised. "They'll probably—" His words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house, followed by heavy footsteps. "Check the back," a rough voice ordered. "Find Lawson." Willa moved quickly to the bedside table where her uncle kept a revolver. She checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself by the bedroom door, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The door burst open moments later, revealing a tall, unshaven man with a jagged scar across his left cheek. He froze momentarily at the sight of Willa pointing the revolver at his chest. "Take one more step and I'll shoot," she said, her voice remarkably calm. The man, Tucker, she presumed recovered from his surprise and smiled unpleasantly. Well, what do we have here?" "Lawson's got himself a nursemaid." He glanced past her to where Garrett was attempting to rise from the bed, and in a bad way from the looks of it. "Get out of this house," Willa commanded. "Now," Tucker laughed. "You won't shoot, city girl. Besides, we ain't here for you. Just got some unfinished business with your patient there." "She'll shoot," Garrett called from behind her, "and if she doesn't, I will." He had managed to retrieve a small derringer from his boot, which now pointed at Tucker. The standoff was broken by the sound of more horses approaching fast. Tucker glanced nervously toward the window. "This ain't over, Lawson," he spat, then backed away and disappeared down the hallway, shouting for his brothers. Willa maintained her position until she heard the sound of horses galloping away, then rushed to the window. Relief flooded through her as she recognized her uncle and 3 of his ranch hands riding into the yard, rifles drawn as they watched the Briggs brothers flee. "Are you all right?" she asked Garrett, turning back to find him pale and sweating from the exertion of his movements. "I've been better," he admitted, lowering the small pistol. His eyes held hers with newfound respect. "You didn't flinch." "Neither did you," she replied, helping him settle back against the pillows. When James burst into the room moments later, he found them looking at each other with an intensity that made him pause briefly before his concern took over. "Willa, are you hurt?" Peterson saw the broken window. "We're fine, Uncle James," she assured him. "The Briggs brothers paid us a visit, but they left when they heard you coming." James looked from Willa to Garrett, his expression hardening. "Your men, Lawson?" "Ex-men," Garrett corrected. "I fired them for rustling. They've apparently decided to hold a grudge." James seemed unconvinced, but before he could respond, Willa interjected. "Uncle, Mr. Lawson was defending this house alongside me. Perhaps we could discuss this after everyone has had a chance to calm down." To her relief, James nodded reluctantly. "Peterson and the boys will stay close to the house tonight," he said before leaving. That evening, after ensuring Garrett was comfortable for the night, Willa joined her uncle on the porch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "You handled yourself well today," James said, offering her a cup of coffee. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the steaming mug. "Though I hope not to make a habit of threatening men with firearms." A hint of a smile touched her uncle's weathered face. "You're more like your mother than I realized. She had that same steel beneath the grace." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before James spoke again. "Lawson's been talking to you." It wasn't a question, but Willa answered anyway. "Yes, he's explained his side of your disagreement," James snorted. "I'm sure he painted himself the misunderstood visionary." "Actually," Willa replied carefully, "he admitted to pride and poor communication, as he believes you have been equally guilty of." Her uncle looked at her in surprise, then gazed out at the darkening landscape. "Perhaps," he conceded finally, "doesn't change the fact that he wants my land." "He wants access to your water," Willa corrected. "Has he ever proposed a partnership rather than a purchase?" James was silent for so long that Willa thought he might not answer. "Once," he admitted finally, "early on, but his terms seemed designed to eventually push me out, and you counter-offered." "I refused outright," James said, a defensive note entering his voice. "This land has been in our family for 20 years. Your grandfather homesteaded it. I wasn't about to let some ambitious youngster take control." Willa sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "The ranch is struggling, Uncle James. You said so yourself in your telegram. Perhaps it's time to consider new approaches." "You've been here a week, Willa," James replied, though his tone remained gentle. "There's more history here than you understand." "Then help me understand," she pressed. "Because from what I can see, two stubborn men are letting pride stand in the way of what could benefit you both." James studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You really are like your mother, always seeing through to the heart of things." He stood, wincing slightly as his knees protested. "I'll think on what you've said. That's all I can promise for now." In the days that followed, a fragile truce seemed to form between James and Garrett. They weren't friendly exactly, but the open hostility had faded into something more like wary respect. Willa found herself increasingly drawn to Garrett's company, initially justifying her frequent visits to his room as medical necessity, but soon acknowledging to herself that she enjoyed their conversations. Garrett revealed himself to be well-read and thoughtful, with a dry wit that often surprised laughter from her. He told her stories of his journey west from Pennsylvania after his parents died of influenza, of working cattle drives and saving every penny until he could buy his first small parcel of land. In turn, Willa shared her experiences in Boston, her work with Dr. Crawford, and her dreams of a life with more purpose than society functions and suitable marriages. She found herself telling him things she'd never voiced aloud, her relief when her engagement ended, her fear that she would never find a place where she truly belonged. 2 weeks after the accident, Dr. Simpson declared Garrett fit to begin limited movement with crutches. Willa helped him take his first tentative steps onto the porch, where he sank gratefully into a rocking chair, breathing deeply of the fresh air. "I'd forgotten how good it feels to be outside," he said, closing his eyes against the afternoon sun. Willa smiled, taking the chair beside him. "You've been remarkably patient for a man used to being in constant motion." "Had good reason to stay put," he replied, opening his eyes to look at her. The intensity in his gaze made her heart quicken. "Your leg needed proper healing time," she said, deliberately misunderstanding. Garrett's smile suggested he saw through her evasion. "That too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as a distant thunderstorm gathered over the mountains. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, a blessing in the drought-prone region. "Will you stay?" Garrett asked suddenly. "In Glenrio, I mean." Willa considered the question. "I came here intending to," she replied honestly. "Whether I'll be useful to my uncle in the long term remains to be seen." "You've been more than useful already," Garrett said. "James talks differently about the ranch now. There's more hope in his voice." "He needs to make changes," Willa said. "The drought has hit everyone hard, and from what I've seen of the books, the Crooked S was already struggling before that." Garrett nodded. "Most small ranches are. That's why I've been pushing for cooperation among the landholders. Together, we might weather what none of us can alone." "Perhaps you should explain that to my uncle again," Willa suggested. "Now that you're not actively trying to buy him out. You think he'd listen?" "I think he might," she replied. "Especially if the proposal came with assurances that the Crooked S would remain independent." Garrett studied her thoughtfully. "You understand more about ranching than you let on." "I understand people," Willa corrected, "and I've spent hours going through the ranch accounts while you've been recovering. The numbers don't lie, Mr. Lawson." "Garrett," he said. "After saving my life and defending me from outlaws, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Willa felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Garrett," she agreed softly. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, bringing with them the rich scent of wet earth. Neither moved to go inside, content to watch as the life-giving moisture soaked the parched ground. "I should return to the Lazy G tomorrow," Garrett said after a while, his voice reluctant. "I've imposed on your uncle's hospitality long enough." Willa felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his departure. "Are you certain you're strong enough? The ride is considerable." "I'll take it slow," he assured her, "and my foreman can bring a wagon. I'll speak with Dr. Simpson," Willa said. "If he agrees, then we'll make arrangements." The following morning dawned clear and fresh after the night's rain. Dr. Simpson, summoned for a final check, pronounced Garrett fit to travel, provided he used crutches and rested frequently over the next week. Garrett's foreman, a taciturn man named Ben Fletcher, arrived mid-morning with a wagon padded with blankets for the journey. As the men loaded Garrett's few possessions, Willa found herself hovering nearby, reluctant to say goodbye. James appeared from the barn, approaching Garrett where he stood balanced on his crutches beside the wagon. "Lawson," James greeted him, "before you go, there's a matter we should discuss." Garrett straightened as much as his injured leg allowed. "I'm listening." To Willa's surprise, her uncle extended his hand. "I've been thinking about what my niece has said, and about the offer you made when you first came to Glenrio." He cleared his throat. "Perhaps it's time we talked again not as rivals but as neighbors with a common interest in survival." Garrett's eyes widened slightly before he reached out to shake James's hand firmly. "I'd welcome that conversation, Simmons." "Come back when you're steadier on that leg," James said. "We'll see what can be arranged about water rights and grazing coordination." When her uncle had walked away, Garrett turned to Willa, his expression a mix of amazement and admiration. "What kind of miracle worker are you, Miss Simmons?" "Just someone who sees clearly what others allow pride to obscure," she replied with a small smile. "Will you be part of these negotiations?" he asked. "If my uncle wishes it," she answered. "Though I suspect you two will find your way without me." Garrett's gaze held hers. "I hope our paths will cross again soon, regardless of business arrangements." "Glenrio is a small town, Mr. Lawson," Willa said, her tone lighter than she felt. "I imagine we'll see each other frequently." He nodded, then reached for her hand, pressing it briefly between both of his. "Thank you, Willa, for everything." As she watched the wagon pull away, Willa felt an emptiness settle in her chest that took her by surprise. In just over 2 weeks, Garrett Lawson had become far more important to her than she had anticipated. The days that followed took on a rhythm that both satisfied and challenged Willa. She threw herself into ranch work, learning to ride better, helping with the cattle, and continuing to organize the chaotic accounts. James, seeing her genuine interest and aptitude, began including her in all aspects of the operation. 3 weeks after Garrett's departure, Willa rode into town for supplies. As she secured her horse outside the general store, she heard her name called. Turning, she saw Martha Green waving from the doorway. "Willa, I was hoping you'd come in today," Martha said as Willa approached. "There's to be a harvest dance Saturday next at the Henderson farm. The whole county will be there." "A dance?" Willa echoed, surprised. Such social gatherings had been common in Boston, of course, but she hadn't expected similar events in Glenrio. "Oh yes, it's quite the affair," Martha continued enthusiastically. "Everyone brings food, the men clear out the barn, and there's music and dancing until all hours. You must come, it would do you good to meet more folks than just those dusty ranch hands at the Crooked S." Willa smiled at Martha's motherly concern. "I'd be delighted to attend. Is my uncle expected as well, James?" "Heavens, he hasn't missed a harvest dance in 20 years, Martha replied with a knowing twinkle in her eye. "Though he claims to hate dancing, he's always among the last to leave." Inside the store, as Martha gathered Willa's supplies, she continued chatting. "Young Tommy said he saw you riding near Lightning Creek yesterday, taking quite an interest in the ranch operations, aren't you?" "I find it fascinating," Willa admitted. "So different from city life, but satisfying in ways I never expected." Martha nodded approvingly. "You've got good instincts for it," James says. "He's mighty proud of how quickly you've taken to ranch life." She paused, then added casually, "Garrett Lawson was asking after you yesterday when he came in for supplies." Willa felt her cheeks warm. "Oh, I hope he's recovering well." "Seems to be," Martha replied, not quite hiding her smile at Willa's reaction. "Still using one crutch, but moving better." "Said he'd be at the dance." "Did he?" Willa murmured, busying herself with examining a bolt of calico to hide her pleased expression. "He did indeed," Martha confirmed. "Now, will you be wanting any of this fabric? I just got it in from Denver. Would make a lovely dress for the dance." Willa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I think I would." The afternoon of the harvest dance arrived with perfect early autumn weather. Willa stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the collar of her new dress. The deep blue calico complemented her dark hair and brought out the blue of her eyes. The style was simpler than what she would have worn in Boston, but the fitted bodice and full skirt were flattering nonetheless. "You look beautiful," James said from the doorway. He had cleaned up impressively himself, his beard trimmed and wearing a suit that, while slightly outdated, was well kept. "Thank you, Uncle," Willa replied, suddenly feeling shy. "Do you think it's appropriate for a country dance?" James smiled. "It's perfect." "Your mother would be proud to see the woman you've become, Willa." They rode to the Henderson farm in the wagon, James unusually talkative as he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of past harvest celebrations. The excitement building within Willa surprised her in Boston. She had often dreaded social gatherings with their rigid expectations and superficial conversations. Here, she found herself genuinely looking forward to the evening. The Henderson barn had been transformed with lanterns hanging from the rafters, hay bales arranged for seating, and a cleared central space for dancing. Tables along one wall groaned under the weight of food brought by the attendees. A small group of musicians was tuning up in one corner 2 fiddles, a guitar, and a harmonica. As Willa and James entered, several people called greetings. Willa was introduced to neighbors she hadn't yet met, each welcoming her warmly to the community. She found herself relaxing, drawn into conversations about cattle prices, weather predictions, and local happenings. She was helping Martha arrange a display of pies when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Garrett standing there, leaning lightly on a polished walking stick. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed, wearing a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. The transformation from the injured man she had nursed was striking. "Miss Simmons," he greeted her, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. "You look lovely." "Mr. Lawson," she returned, suddenly breathless, "you're looking well recovered." "Thanks to your excellent care," he replied, "though I still dream of your uncle's spare bedroom sometimes." Martha, watching this exchange with poorly concealed delight, excused herself to check on the punch, leaving them alone despite the crowded barn. "How is the lazy G?" Willa asked, searching for safe conversational ground. "Thriving, especially after the recent rains," Garrett answered. "And the crooked S? Your uncle mentioned you've taken quite an active role." "I've found I have an affinity for ranch life," Willa admitted, "though I still have much to learn." The musicians struck up a lively tune and couples began moving to the dance floor. Garrett watched them for a moment, then turned back to Willa. "I don't suppose you'd consider dancing with a man who might step on your toes with his bad leg?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath the light tone. "I would be honored," Willa replied, placing her hand in his offered one. "Though I should warn you, my dancing lessons were focused on waltzes and quadrilles, not whatever that is." She nodded toward the energetic movements on the floor. Garrett laughed. "That's what we call a Virginia reel out here. Don't worry, I'll guide you through it." Despite his still healing leg, Garrett proved to be an excellent dance partner. He kept to the less demanding steps and supported Willa through the unfamiliar patterns with gentle guidance and encouraging smiles. By the end of the dance, they were both laughing, and Willa felt a freedom she had rarely experienced in the formal ballrooms of Boston. As the evening progressed, Willa danced with several other men, including her uncle, who indeed proved to be surprisingly light on his feet. But her gaze frequently sought out Garrett, finding him watching her with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through her. During a break in the music, Garrett approached her again. "Would you care for some air? It's getting rather warm in here." Willa nodded, accepting his arm as they made their way outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky in numbers she had never seen in the city. They walked slowly toward a nearby apple orchard, the scent of ripening fruit sweetening the cool air. "Your uncle and I have had 2 meetings about water rights," Garrett said after a comfortable silence. "We're making progress." "I'm glad to hear it," Willa replied sincerely. "He seems more hopeful about the ranch's future lately." "Much of that is due to you," Garrett said, stopping to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softened, but his eyes remained intense. "You've brought new life to the Crooked S and to your uncle." "I've found something I didn't know I was seeking," Willa admitted. "Purpose, belonging." Garrett took a step closer. "And have you found everything you were looking for in Glenrio?" The question hung between them, layered with meaning. Willa looked up at him, reading the hope and uncertainty in his expression. "Not everything," she answered softly. "Not yet." Garrett reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. "Willa," he began, then paused, seeming to search for words. "I know we've known each other only briefly and under unusual circumstances, but I find myself thinking of you constantly." Willa's heart quickened. "I've thought of you too," she confessed. Encouraged, he continued. "When I was lying in that creek bed, certain I would die there, my regrets were for things undone, words unsaid. Since then, I've promised myself I wouldn't waste chances that come my way." He took her hands in his. "You are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Brave, intelligent, compassionate. I'd very much like to court you properly if you'd permit it." Willa felt a smile bloom across her face. "I would permit it, Garrett, gladly." The joy that lit his features was answer enough, but he leaned down slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Willa rose slightly on her toes, meeting his lips in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with shared longing. When they finally parted, both breathing a little faster, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably ask your uncle's permission," he murmured. Willa laughed softly. "Given your history, that conversation should be interesting. But I think he'll be more receptive than you might expect." They returned to the dance, Willa's arm tucked securely in Garrett's, both aware of the curious and approving glances that followed them. James, spotting them entering together, raised an eyebrow but offered a small nod that Willa took as tentative acceptance. Over the following weeks, Garrett became a frequent visitor at the Crooked S. His courtship of Willa progressed alongside his business discussions with James, both relationships deepening with time and shared understanding. Autumn faded into winter, bringing snow to the high country and quieter days at the ranch. Willa continued to expand her knowledge and responsibilities, proving herself an invaluable partner in the operation. The agreement between the Crooked S and the Lazy G was finalized, a fair arrangement that allowed both ranches access to water while maintaining their independence. On Christmas Eve, with a fire crackling in the hearth and pine boughs decorating the modest ranch house, Garrett joined Willa and James for dinner. The meal was festive by frontier standards: a roasted turkey, potatoes, fresh bread, and a pie Martha had sent over. After dinner, as they sat enjoying coffee and the warmth of the fire, James surprised them both by standing and clearing his throat. "I've been thinking on something," he began, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "This past year has brought more changes than I expected, some hard, some wonderful." He glanced at Willa with affection. "Having you here has shown me what I've been missing, girl, family, someone to share the work and the rewards." He turned to Garrett. "And you, Lawson, never thought I'd say this, but you've proven yourself a man of honor. Your ideas for the water sharing have already saved us both considerable trouble this dry season." James reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to Willa. "My Christmas gift to you both. Had the lawyer draw it up last week." Willa opened it, Garrett looking over her shoulder. It was a deed transferring half ownership of the Crooked S Ranch to Willa Simmons. "Uncle James," Willa gasped, looking up with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," James replied simply. "Make this place your home, as it should be." "Of course I'll stay," Willa assured him, rising to embrace him tightly. "Thank you. This means more than I can express." James returned her embrace, then stepped back, looking somewhat embarrassed by the emotional display. He turned to Garrett. "Well, Lawson, don't you have something to ask me now?" Garrett looked startled, then understanding dawned. With a rueful smile, he nodded. "I suppose I do." He moved to stand before James. "Mr. Simmons, I would like to ask for your niece's hand in marriage. I love her deeply and promise to cherish and respect her always." James studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "You have my blessing, Garrett, though I suspect my permission isn't the one that matters most." Both men turned to Willa, who stood watching them with bright eyes and flushed cheeks. "Well," Garrett asked, moving to take her hands in his. "Willa Simmons, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." The wedding took place in early May, when the prairie was alive with wildflowers and new growth. The entire town of Glenrio turned out for the ceremony, held in the small church with Martha Green weeping openly in the front pew, and James looking uncomfortable but proud in his best suit as he walked Willa down the aisle. The bride wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her order from Denver, her dark hair crowned with wildflowers. Garrett, standing tall and strong by the altar, watched her approach with such naked adoration that several of the hardened ranchers in attendance were seen to discreetly wipe their eyes. The reception was held at the Crooked S, the yard transformed with tables, lanterns, and flowers. Music, dancing, and laughter continued well into the night, a celebration not just of the union between Willa and Garrett, but of the new spirit of cooperation that had begun to spread among the ranchers of the region. As twilight deepened into night, the newlyweds slipped away from the festivities, riding to the place where they had first met, the stand of cottonwoods by Lightning Creek. Garrett had arranged blankets and a small picnic, a private moment before they would travel to the Lazy G, which would be their home. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" Garrett asked as they sat beside the creek, his arm around her shoulders. "Completely," Willa replied, turning to meet his kiss. "Though I never imagined when I left Boston that I would find love in a creek bed in Wyoming." Garrett laughed, pulling her closer. "When you found me that day, I was certain my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." The following spring found significant changes at both ranches. The water-sharing agreement had expanded to include several neighboring spreads, creating a cooperative that was weathering the continuing drought far better than individual ranchers could have. Garrett had implemented new breeding programs that promised hardier stock, while Willa had established a small but thriving medical practice, treating ranch families who would otherwise have had to travel to Laramie for care. Their personal happiness had only grown with time. The passion that had sparked during Garrett's convalescence had deepened into a partnership of equals, each supporting and challenging the other. They divided their time between the lazy G and the crooked S, helping James maintain his independence while building their own legacy. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of their home at the Lazy G, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Willa took Garrett's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said softly, watching his face. Understanding dawned slowly, then his expression transformed with wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" Willa nodded, her eyes shining. "Come November if all goes well." Garrett gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words for several moments. Finally, he whispered against her hair, "I never thought I could be this happy." "Nor I," Willa replied, leaning back to look up at him. "It's strange to think that if you hadn't broken your leg that day, don't," Garrett interrupted with a smile. "That's one injury I'll never regret." As darkness fell around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future and that of their child, secure in the love they had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. 5 years later, the Lazy G Crooked S partnership had become one of the most successful ranching operations in the territory. The main house at the Lazy G had been expanded to accommodate not only Willa and Garrett, but also James, who had finally agreed to move in with them after a bout of pneumonia had left him weakened. Their son, William James Lawson, now 4, adored his great-uncle and followed him everywhere, soaking up stories of the early days of ranching in Wyoming. Willa's medical practice had grown, with a proper office in town where she saw patients 3 days a week. She had trained 2 local women as nurses, providing much-needed health care to the community. Garrett, meanwhile, had been elected to the territorial legislature, where he advocated for policies that supported small ranchers and farmers. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Willa returned home from her office in town to find an unusual scene. Garrett was sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands, while William played nearby with their dog, oblivious to his father's distress. "Garrett." Willa called, concern immediately rising as she dismounted and hurried toward him. "What's wrong?" He looked up at her approach, his face drawn with worry and something that looked like defeat. "The dam," he said simply. "The one we built last year on the north boundary. The spring floods undermined it, and now with the heavy rains last week." He gestured helplessly. "It's failing. If it breaks completely, we'll lose the entire north pasture, maybe more." Willa sat beside him, understanding the gravity of the situation. The dam had been Garrett's design, an ambitious project to create a reservoir that would ensure water through even the worst droughts. They had invested heavily in its construction. "Can it be repaired?" she asked. Garrett shook his head slowly. "I've had every man on it for 2 days. The damage is too extensive, too deep. I can't fix it, Willa." His voice broke slightly. All that work, all that promise gone. Willa took his hands, pulling them gently away from his face so he would look at her. "Then don't," she said firmly. "Don't what?" He asked, confusion mixing with his despair. "Don't fix it," she elaborated. "Just heal. Let the land heal itself. We'll build something new, something better, together like we always have." Garrett stared at her, then let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You still surprise me, do you know that? 5 years of marriage and you can still say exactly what I need to hear." Willa smiled, leaning forward to kiss him softly. "That's because I know you, Garrett Lawson. You don't give up, you find new paths forward." He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as if drawing strength from her presence. When he finally released her, determination had replaced the defeat in his eyes. "You're right," he said. "We'll let the dam go, redirect the water along the eastern slope where it wants to flow naturally. Might even create better grazing there." Willa nodded encouragingly. "And the north pasture, we'll reassess," Garrett replied, his mind already working on solutions. "Maybe it's time to try that new rotation system we've been discussing." William, noticing his parents' serious conversation, approached cautiously. "Papa sad?" he asked, his small face concerned. Garrett reached out, lifting his son onto his lap. "Not anymore, partner. Your mama reminded me of something important. Sometimes when things break, we have to let them go and build something better." William considered this with the solemnity only a 4-year-old can muster. "Like when I broke my wooden horse and you made me a bigger one," Garrett laughed, the sound washing away the last of his despondency. "Exactly like that." Later that night, after William was asleep and James had retired to his room, Willa and Garrett stood on the porch, looking out at the land that had brought them together. The moon illuminated the rolling prairie, the distant mountains a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found you that day?" Willa asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "I'd probably still be feuding with your uncle for one thing," Willa laughed softly. "And I might have returned to Boston, convinced the West wasn't for me." "Thank God for stubborn horses and broken legs, then," Garrett said, turning to face her. His hands cradled her face with the same tenderness he had shown since their first kiss. "Finding you was the best accident of my life." Willa rose on her toes to meet his lips, feeling the same spark that had first kindled between them years ago. "And healing you was the beginning of healing myself," she whispered against his mouth. The future stretched before them, filled with challenges they would face together, joys they would share, and the deep, abiding love they had found in each other's arms. From the moment she had found him, head in his hands, unable to fix what was broken, they had been building something stronger than either could have created alone. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Wyoming sky, Willa knew with absolute certainty that their greatest achievement wasn't the successful ranches or their growing family, but the love that had taught them both how to heal and, in that healing, to thrive.